Picture Christmas night. Not the chaos of the morning, not the wrapping paper and the noise. The later part. The quiet part. Dinner finished, extended family gone home. The house settling into that particular stillness that only happens on Christmas night. In a large house on 15th Street in Boulder, Colorado, a 6-year-old girl is being carried upstairs to bed. She fell asleep in the car on the way home from a neighbor's Christmas party. Her parents undress her carefully so they don't wake her, put her in her pajamas, tuck her in. Her father goes to bed. Her mother stays up a little longer, and then the house is completely quiet. Sometime in the hours that follow, something happens inside that house. Something that nobody has ever been able to fully explain. Something that 29 years later, the police are still investigating. Her name was JonBenét Patricia Ramsey. She was 6 years old, and when her mother came downstairs the next morning, she was gone. What followed was not just a murder investigation. It was a 3-decade collapse of justice, a media circus that destroyed innocent lives, a crime scene so badly mishandled that it may never be properly solved, and a killer who has never faced a single consequence. Until now. Because as of December 2025, the Boulder Police Department has confirmed new DNA testing, new interviews, and new evidence. After 29 years, something has changed. This is the Cold Files, and tonight we go through everything. JonBenét Ramsey was born on August 6, 1990, in Atlanta, Georgia. She was the youngest of John Ramsey's children. He had 3 from a previous marriage, and the second child of John and Patsy Ramsey. People who knew her describe a child who was funny and outgoing and completely at ease with strangers. She had a talent for mimicking voices and making adults laugh. She loved her older brother Burke, who was 9 when she died. She loved horses and swimming and performing at anything, anywhere for anyone who would watch. Patsy Ramsey had been a beauty queen herself, Miss West Virginia in 1977. She started entering JonBenét in children's pageants when she was around 4 years old. By the time JonBenét was 6, she had won a string of titles: Little Miss Colorado, America's Royal Miss, National Tiny Miss Beauty. The pageant world would later define how the media told her story, and not in a way that served her. The footage of her performing, the hair, the makeup, the costumes, became the image the whole world associated with her name. And that image made it very easy for people to project whatever they wanted onto who she was. But she was 6 years old. She was a child who went to school and argued with her brother and asked too many questions and fell asleep in the car on the way home from parties. She was not a symbol. She was a little girl. The Ramseys were a wealthy family. John Ramsey was the CEO of Access Graphics, a technology company that had just crossed $1 billion in annual sales. They lived well. They moved in comfortable circles. They were liked by their neighbors. They had no reason to expect that the night of December 25, 1996, would be the last night of their ordinary life. It's a little before 6 in the morning on December 26, 1996. Patsy Ramsey comes downstairs. She finds 3 pages of handwritten paper on the bottom step of the staircase. She starts reading. It's a ransom note. It says her daughter has been kidnapped by a small foreign faction. It demands $118,000 for JonBenét's safe return. It instructs the family not to contact the police or the FBI. It says they will call between 8 and 10 the next morning with instructions. Patsy Ramsey does not follow those instructions. She runs upstairs to check JonBenét's bedroom. The bed is empty. She calls 911. Boulder police arrive at the house within minutes, And this is where the first catastrophic mistake happens. The officers who arrive do not treat the Ramsey house as a crime scene. They allow John Ramsey's friends and colleagues to come inside and be with the family while they wait for the ransom call. Multiple adults, people with no connection to the investigation, walk through the house, touch surfaces, move through rooms. The crime scene is contaminated within the first hour. The ransom note call never comes. By afternoon, a detective asks John Ramsey and a family friend to search the house for anything unusual. They go to the basement. They open a door to a small room that the police had already passed by that morning without checking. JonBenét Ramsey is inside. She has been there since the police arrived. She has been there while her parents waited for a phone call that was never going to come. Her body is partially covered by a white blanket. Her wrists are bound above her head. A cord is wrapped around her neck. John Ramsey picks up his daughter and carries her upstairs. By doing so, he unknowingly destroys any forensic evidence that might have been present on or around the body. The investigation is 2 hours old, and it is already falling apart. The ransom note found on the stairs is extraordinary, and not in a good way. It's 2.5 pages long. Most ransom notes are a few sentences, an address, a dollar amount, a threat. This one is essentially an essay. It opens with the phrase, "Listen to this carefully. Mr. and Mrs. I, listen carefully." It claims to be from a small foreign faction. It demands exactly $118,000, the same amount John Ramsey had received as a bonus from his company that year, a figure not publicly known. It includes phrases that linguists and FBI profilers later identified coming from 2 separate movies, Dirty Harry, Speed. Not from a professional criminal's vocabulary, from someone who watched a lot of American films. It warns the family not to contact the FBI, then immediately references FBI training, incorrectly, suggesting the author thought they were being clever. It says JonBenét is safe and unharmed, using the present tense. She had already been dead for hours when Patsy Ramsey found the note. The handwriting analysts were brought in. Multiple experts examined the note against known samples from dozens of people connected to the case. John Ramsey was definitively ruled out as the author. Patsy Ramsey could not be definitively ruled out, but no expert was willing to say conclusively that she had written it. Every other suspect tested, every adult who had been in or near the Ramsey house in the days before Christmas was also ruled out, which leaves a deeply uncomfortable possibility. The ransom note was written inside the house. That is not a theory. That is a forensic fact. Whoever wrote it was there, with them, with JonBenét. And they have never been identified. Boulder, Colorado in 1996 had a population of around 90,000 people. It was, and still is, a university town, relatively safe, relatively affluent. Its police department was competent for the cases it normally handled. The murder of JonBenét Ramsey was not a case it could handle. On the morning of December 26th, the first officers on scene made a decision that would haunt the investigation forever. They did not immediately secure the house as a crime scene. They did not limit access. They allowed the Ramseys to call friends, who arrived and moved freely through the property. By the time investigators understood they were dealing with a murder, the house had been walked through by more than a dozen people who had nothing to do with the case. The basement room where JonBenét was found had not been checked during the initial sweep. An officer later testified that the door had appeared to be locked, but it wasn't. JonBenét's body was 7 hours into a homicide investigation before anyone found her. When John Ramsey carried her upstairs, he was not thinking about forensic evidence. He was a father who had just found his daughter. But the transfer of her body destroyed trace evidence that could have been crucial. The duct tape that had been over her mouth disappeared somewhere in the chaos. It has never been found. In the days that followed, Boulder PD and the district attorney's office began fighting each other. The police believed the Ramseys had killed their daughter and staged the scene. The DA's office brought in an outside investigator, a retired detective named Lou Smith, who believed an intruder had committed the crime. The two sides stopped sharing information. They were effectively running two separate investigations into the same murder. Meanwhile, the media arrived. Hundreds of journalists, satellite trucks, cameras outside the house around the clock. Potential witnesses were interviewed by journalists before police could reach them. Information was leaked. Evidence details were published. People connected to the case were identified publicly before investigators had finished assessing them. The investigation was broken before it properly began, and the people responsible for JonBenét were watching it fall apart and walking free. In 2003, 7 years after JonBenét's murder, a forensic laboratory in Colorado produced a result that changed the direction of the entire investigation. They found a small amount of male DNA on JonBenét's clothing, on her underwear, beneath her fingernails, and when they ran it against every family member, every friend, every suspect who had been formally interviewed, it matched no one. In 2008, a new DA used what is called touch DNA analysis, a technique that can extract a genetic profile from a tiny number of skin cells too small to see. They ran the test again with the new technique. The results formally and completely excluded John Ramsey, Patsy Ramsey, and their son Burke from having contributed that DNA. The DA publicly exonerated the entire family. That DNA, that small, stubbornly unidentified fragment of someone's biology, became the central mystery within the mystery. In 2016, a new forensic analysis found that the DNA actually contained genetic markers from two separate individuals, not one unknown person, two. Former FBI profiler Candice DeLong has stated she believes the DNA belongs to the killer, that it is too consistent, appearing in too many places on the clothing to be explained by accidental contamination. Other forensic experts disagree. They point out that trace DNA can transfer easily from a factory worker who handled the fabric, from a retailer, from anyone who came into contact with the clothing before it was purchased. But here is what cannot be argued. The DNA exists. It belongs to someone. And modern techniques, specifically genetic genealogy, the same approach that identified the Golden State Killer, could potentially trace that DNA back to a living family. As of December 2025, the Boulder Police Department has confirmed that dozens of pieces of evidence are currently undergoing new DNA testing at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Not retesting of the same samples with the same methods. New evidence, new items from the basement where JonBenét was found. A new examination of the garrote used to strangle her, where the knots may have preserved DNA from whoever tied them. 29 years, and the answer might be sitting in a lab right now. Over the course of the investigation, hundreds of people were formally investigated. Let me walk you through the ones that mattered most. The family. John and Patsy Ramsey were the initial focus of the Boulder PD investigation. The theory was that JonBenét had been accidentally killed, possibly as a result of a punishment that went too far, and the parents had staged the scene and written the ransom note to cover it. The problems with this theory are significant. The DNA did not match either parent. No physical evidence placed either parent in the basement, and writing a 2.5-page ransom note in the hours after accidentally killing your child is not a rational thing that people do. Patsy Ramsey lived under public suspicion for the rest of her life. She died of ovarian cancer in 2006, never charged, never cleared in the public mind. The family was formally exonerated by DNA evidence in 2008. The intruder theory. Lou Smith, the retired detective brought in by the DA's office, spent years building the intruder case. He identified a window well on the side of the house that showed signs consistent with someone having entered through it. He pointed to a scuff mark on the wall below the window. He argued that the complexity of what was done to JonBenét, the type of knots used, the construction of the garrote, suggested someone with specific skills that neither Ramsey parent possessed. Smith believed the killer was someone who had access to the house, possibly someone who had attended the Ramseys' Christmas party the night before, and who hid inside after the guests left. Gary Oliva, in 2000, a convicted sex offender in Boulder, was arrested on unrelated charges. He had been at a party near the Ramsey house on Christmas night 1996. When police searched his belongings, they found a photograph of JonBenét. Gary Oliva wrote letters from prison that included what appeared to be admissions of guilt in the case. He was tested for DNA. No match was confirmed. He died in prison in 2023. David Cooper. More recently, a man using the alias David Cooper contacted John Ramsey and claimed to be a professional killer hired by a disgruntled former employee. He provided details about the inside of the Ramsey home that were not publicly known. His identity has not been publicly confirmed. Investigators are aware of him. 29 years of suspects, hundreds of DNA tests, investigators who have traveled to 19 different states to follow leads, 21,000 tips received. And still, one question that nobody has been able to answer. Who wrote that note? In 1998, the Boulder County District Attorney convened a grand jury. For over a year, that grand jury reviewed every piece of evidence in the case. They heard testimony, they examined documents, they looked at the DNA results, the handwriting analysis, the autopsy findings. In October 1999, the grand jury concluded their work. They voted. They voted to indict John and Patsy Ramsey, not for murder, for child abuse resulting in death, and for being accessories after the fact to a crime committed by an unknown person. District Attorney Alex Hunter reviewed the grand jury's recommendation, and then he declined to sign the indictment. Without his signature, the indictment could not proceed. He stated that there was insufficient evidence to obtain a conviction. The grand jury result was sealed. For 15 years, the public had no idea the grand jury had voted to indict the Ramseys. In 2013, a judge unsealed the documents, and for the first time, the world learned that a grand jury of ordinary citizens, people who had reviewed all of the evidence, had concluded there was probable cause to charge the Ramseys. The DA had decided not to proceed. Whether that decision was the right call or a catastrophic failure of nerve is something reasonable people still disagree about. What is not in dispute is that the family that 12 grand jurors believed should face charges never did, and that Patsy Ramsey died in 2006 without ever being charged or definitively cleared. The secret had been kept for 15 years, and when it came out, it changed nothing, because the statute of limitations on the specific charges had already expired. Here is where the story changes. In September 2025, John Ramsey appeared at CrimeCon in Denver. He announced that dozens of pieces of physical evidence from the case are currently undergoing new DNA testing at the Colorado Bureau of Investigation. Not retesting of the same samples with the same methods, new evidence, new items from the new approaches. The attorney who represented the Ramsey family for decades made a specific public statement about the garrote, the cord used to strangle JonBenét. He said the knots in that cord may preserve DNA because someone had to tie them. And the people who tied them may have left biological material in those knots that has been sitting, waiting for 29 years. In December 2025, Boulder Police Chief Stephen Redfern released his annual update on the case. New interviews conducted, new evidence collected, new leads generated through evolving DNA technology. He said, and this is a direct quote, "It is never too late for people with knowledge of this terrible crime to come forward." Genetic genealogy, the same technique that identified the Golden State Killer after 40 years of silence, has been proposed as the next step. If the unknown DNA from JonBenét's clothing can be profiled with sufficient detail, investigators could trace it through public genealogy databases to find biological relatives and from there, identify the donor. John Ramsey has personally met with the police chief to push for this approach. He has said the meeting was good, that the department seemed eager, that for the first time in a long time he feels like something might actually happen. He has been waiting 29 years. His daughter would have been 35 years old this year. Something may finally be moving. 29 years. That is how long the Ramsey family has been waiting. That is how long this case has consumed careers, destroyed reputations, and defied resolution. Here is what I believe after going through every piece of evidence in this case. I believe the DNA is real and meaningful. I believe the person whose genetic material is on those garments was there that night. I believe the Golden State Killer approach, genetic genealogy run through public databases, is the single most promising path forward that currently exists. I believe the Boulder Police Department failed catastrophically in the first 24 hours, not out of malice, but out of inexperience with a case of this magnitude. And I believe that failure may never be fully overcome, no matter how good the forensic science becomes. I believe John and Patsy Ramsey lost their daughter and then lost their lives to suspicion that the available evidence does not support. And I believe whoever is responsible, whoever wrote that note in that house on that night, has been living with this for 29 years. Walking around, getting older, watching the news every time the anniversary comes around, knowing what they know. JonBenét Ramsey was 6 years old. She was funny and loud and full of herself in the way that 6-year-olds are supposed to be. She had a whole life that was taken from her on the night after Christmas. She deserves an answer. Her father deserves an answer. And somewhere, hopefully soon, an answer is coming. This has been the Cold Files. If you know anything about this case, and the Boulder Police Department means this literally, their tip line is still open. It is in the description below. The file never closes. If this case kept you watching, hit the like button. It genuinely helps more people find this channel and more cold cases get the attention they deserve. Subscribe to the Cold Files and turn on notifications because the next case we're covering is one that most people have never heard of, and it is worse than this one. The file never closes. I'll see you on the next video.